Hey there, welcome to or welcome back to No Pants Profits. My name is Richard. I'm coming to you today from Georgia, more specifically Savannah, Georgia, and more specifically the historic district of Savannah, Georgia. And today we are going to be going to the American Prohibition Museum. Now, Prohibition is when they banned alcohol. And if you know this channel, banning of alcohol is not a good thing. So this is a museum that you can buy a ticket to normally for like $20, or you can buy a ticket to with a drink for like 30, or you can get a full guided tour with a Prohibition era drink for like $50. So they have tours at 10, 11:30, 1, and 3, but check their website. And what's interesting is it works in dynamic pricing. So as there's less spots available, the price for the tour goes up. I swear, that's what I saw. It's kind of cool. You don't usually see dynamic pricing at tourist attractions, but we're going to go ahead and check out the Prohibition Museum, do their tour, and I'm going to bring you along. So let's get not drunk and then get drunk. Oh no. This seems a little off for this channel, but also a little on for this channel. We're going to talk about banning drinking and then how people drank when they banned drinking. So come along and let's see how this turns out. All right, so I checked in here and got this, oh God. I don't know about this. Got a menu. Got a menu. We have to order a drink. Ooh, I am not okay. Ugh. Rum, lime, sugar. If you like a margarita, you know. Oh, okay. Here we go. Oh, okay. That's what they're trying to say. If you like a gin and tonic, you'll enjoy a gin and rickey. If you like straight whiskey, you'll enjoy an old fashioned. If you like mimosa, you'll like that one. If you like a cold rush, you'll enjoy. If you like a rum punch, no, I don't like Martino. Planter's punch, beer liquor, Miller High Life, bourbon, or moonshine. That's a shot, and a beer is a Boilermaker. Jack and Rose, brandy. Ooh, I guess I'm gonna go with rum, lime, and sugar on a daiquiri. But if you want to learn more, you can scan that QR code. Jack Rose, Brown Derby. Oh, I think we're gonna go with a daiquiri. Yeah, these are all kind of old-fashioned bourbon drinks. So you're gonna order here in the front. I'll wait for everyone to get here, and then they'll have a drink downstairs ready for us when we finish the tour, I assume. We're just walking in here, letting us wait inside. It's actually beautifully designed, I do have to say. They did a great job designing it here. Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, some angry man pushing his beer along. So angry. A little child, a small little wax child. But yes, this is Anheuser-Busch. They're showing Savannah, Georgia in 1933. They're beautifully designed, like full 360 set here. They even hide the projector, which is really cute. It almost looks like something like Disney or Universal would design. I do like it. It's very immersive, I guess is the right word. So we're definitely gonna learn about this. And there's supposedly a secret door to a speakeasy. I already ordered a daiquiri, just because I got 5 hours of driving to do after this. So this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. Red Knob beer. Liquor is a curse. Well, I curse more when I'm on liquor. So I kind of agree with that. But, oh look, we even have props. Oh God, alcohol is poison. Oh, that'll be funny.
All right.
That'll be funny.
Started. My name is Emmy. I'm going to be your tour guide today. Very excited to share part of Savannah's history, but more part of our nation's history, as Prohibition is a national thing. Before we get to the tour though, just the housekeeping stuff. I already let you guys know you can take as many photos and videos as you like. The second thing to note is, of course, this is a museum still, so we cannot touch the artifacts or the wax figures, most importantly. The last thing is I love to make my tour very interactive, very much a communal experience, because we're on this tour together. together. We have things we were looking for. So I really want to make sure that if you guys have any questions on this tour, please feel free to ask me. I love questions. I love curiosity. I know a lot, but I don't know everything. If I don't know the answer to something, I will be honest with you. We can just go to Google later together. But with that, you guys, we're going to start right here in this room that is modeled after the year 1900. And this is what most cities would look like at this point in history. And that includes this demonstration right behind me here of these ladies protesting this alcohol delivery, as this is an example of temperance. Temperance is the movement that leads up to the national ban on alcohol between 1920 to 1933, also known as Prohibition. Now, this is also where we're going to get some very complicated terms we're going to be using throughout the entirety of the tour. These very long-winded, complex terms I promise we're going to remember together. We're all geniuses. These ladies over here with the white ribbons protesting the alcohol delivery are on the anti-alcohol side, known as the dry side. Aww. Complicated term number one. This gentleman over here who looks like Robert De Niro, pro-alcohol side, known as the
wet side.
You got it. Like I said, very complicated terms. They were very creative thinkers back in the day. But this sincerely was a big, diverse topic in America at the time. This was truly something that was dividing the country. It wasn't the haves versus the have-nots, or the left versus the right. It was the wet versus the dries.
And was there a drinking age back then, or?
There was really not.
Okay.
No, not in particular. There was a voting age, though. Back then, the voting age was 21, ironically enough, the age they now can drink at. But back in the day, people as young as 14, 13 would be drinking alcohol. We'll get into the history of that in a second. It's very important context. We've always been best friends for sure. As you guys look around, you'll see that propaganda. You'll notice that a lot of it does mention drinking, but a lot of it more is mentioning the economics of drinking, as that is a main part of Prohibition and why it happens, is the economic aspect of it. Now, the dries would eventually win, as we know. They would win because they got some big personalities and they're very well organized. Has anyone been by Forsyth Park since being to Savannah yet? It's a beautiful part of our city. It's one of the 23 squares that make up our city. It's the largest one, has an amphitheater in it. And in fact, if you were to visit Forsyth on June 7th in 1919, you'd hear the words of one of those very big personalities. I think I can still hear him now if you guys want to follow me. It's going to be the loudest portion of the tour. Feel free to get close to him, close to me, by the wall, what have you, wherever you feel comfortable. I do ask you to leave some space for any self-guided folks that might come through. This gentleman is Mr. Billy Sunday, and as you'll be able to tell in a second, he is a very evangelical style preacher. Very passionate, very emphatic, very much spitting on that first row. But who was he before he is the man you see right there? He was a baseball player. In fact, he was a pitcher for the Chicago White Sox. For a decade, he played baseball. How does he go from pitching to preaching? Well, it starts with his two sons. He has two young boys, both of whom die early in adulthood due to complications from alcohol. So we see he has that personal vendetta towards them. And as you can tell from that quote up top, Savannah is the wickedest city in the world. He was not our biggest fan, but in my delusional state, I like to read that as Savannah is the wickedest city in the world. Now, has anybody read The Great Gatsby yet? Yeah, a couple of people, yeah? Up these stairs, you'll see a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby, also a renowned alcoholic. He would famously state, first you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, and then the drink takes you. We're going to head up these stairs together, you guys.
$42 in tax on the whiskey, and they expect to realize $300 million. That means that the American people have got to buy and drink 100.
We're out on the rail. Let's have we're going to hit against the rail there. Yeah. We are. We're talking about that a little later in the tour.
Big compliment.
Awesome. Thank you guys for leaving space for any self-guided folks. Now, I'm going to turn to you guys to answer a question here. The way you're going to answer it is by giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Thumbs up, woo, yeah, let's go, wet side, alcohol. Thumbs down, boo, no, dry, no alcohol. What side of the aisle do you think F. Scott Fitzgerald was on? Do you think he was a wet or a dry?
Wet.
Wet? We all thinking wet here? He was a dry. I know, shocking, right? He was an alcoholic. He would actually famously state that prohibition was the only way he could be sober. But that's why I do this exactly, to showcase that people you think would be wet were dry, people think dry would be wet. It is a crazy part of our history. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was in school, they didn't teach it very well. It's kind of like, well, Prohibition happened, let's talk about World War II. They don't go into the details of it. So that's my personal goals for you guys on this tour, is to understand who exactly wants Prohibition. Especially with our modern lens, it's crazy to think about people banning alcohol. But we're also going to learn how they did it, socially and politically. Not only that, we're going to learn what are the lasting after effects together here. Now, we're going to kind of skip ahead in time a little bit with this event behind me here, also behind you guys with the wax figures. This is the Whiskey River. This is actively during Prohibition. This takes place in Brooklyn, New York in September of 1926. And it's an event where you see these police officers, these barrel busters, bust down this whiskey barrels in the middle of the street, sending it flooding through the gutter. The reason they do this so publicly is to show it is getting enforced. They're also showing they're not taking the alcohol back to the office and enjoying it themselves, as they are being accused of doing so. But my question for you guys is, why do we think we see children here gathering all this whiskey up?
Because mom and dad were working?
Because mom and dad were working. Who's going to arrest the kids? Of course, we can tell some of them were sent probably by their parents with those pots and those buckets there. Definitely sent by some other family members. But we'll also notice that some kids have teacups and ladles, and this is where we get to your question about the drinking age. Because at this point in history, these kids might have had a taste for whiskey already. Reason being, again, America had a tight-knit relationship with alcohol since day one. Our founding father, George Washington, owned Mount Vernon Distillery. We have intrinsic ties to brewers and distillers as a country. Even when the Pilgrims first come over, they mostly bring alcohol. Reason being, it's safe. Water is not inherently safe naturally. We are blessed to have a filtration system. We're incredibly lucky to have that. That is not how it comes to us, though. It has diseases, gangrene, parasites, very, very dangerous stuff. So you'll find that most cultures figured out a couple different ways to fix this. You either boil the water, make coffee, make tea, or you make alcohol. America, we make alcohol here. We like to keep it sweet and simple. Just let it sit and rest for a while. So that's the reason why we're drinking so much, is because it's the safest option. Kids, you'd usually drink like ciders or beer of like 3% there. But remember, in the 1800s, we're also switching from an agrarian society to an industrialized society, meaning farming being our main economic resource to manufacturing. So kids as young as 13 and 14, these young boys especially, would be working in these manufacturing plants during a time where unions don't exist and child protective laws don't exist. So this factory work is incredibly dangerous, incredibly stressful. You're working 12 plus hours a day minimum in these dark, dusty spaces. That is a lot of stress. And how do we deal with stress without any psychiatric services? Free drink, exactly. We self-medicate. You got it there. So that's one of the reasons we see America's drinking a lot at this point in time. Right now, currently, if you boil down just the percentage of alcohol we drink, we're at 2 gallons per person per year. Not the worst in the world. It's not the best either. It's the highest it's been since Prohibition, thanks COVID. But other than that, it's not terrible. Back during the 1800s, though, that was 7 gallons per person per year. Over triple the amount we are currently drinking. So we can see we truly were a country of drunkards at this point in time. So we already start seeing some motivation possibly for Prohibition, but who exactly wants it to happen? To answer that question, you guys, we're going to head up these steps to the next hallway. Feel free to kind of take a look at all this propaganda you'll see going around here. In 1730, Oglethorpe does first try to make us go dry. It does not last very long. He gets kicked out about a decade after Savannah founded. We're going to stand over here, you guys. Feel free to stand next to Mo and Joe. Feel free to stand next to the cop there, whichever your preference. All right. Now, a little Easter egg for you guys. Black Rabbit Tavern right here is actually a bar in Savannah you guys can enjoy. It has soup, salads, and sandwiches. It's a lovely little spot for lunch. But in this hallway, we're going to start kind of talking about who exactly wants prohibition. There are two groups of people that do. Before we fully answer those two questions, a little bit more context and understanding the culture in the 1800s. For one thing, we're drinking a lot. Again, we have that Industrial Revolution going on. We also just had a very significant war, the Civil War, an incredibly traumatic part of our country. Regardless if it was good reasons, there's still people who had to fight in this war. Again, a lot of that psychological trauma, what do you do with it? You self-medicate. So that's another reason why we're drinking so much. It's another reason why we see the increase of saloons. Saloons are not like a modern bar today. They're not like Black Rabbit Tavern. The bartenders there, they're legally responsible for you. They're there to make sure you don't overdrink, but you still get served. Bartenders in the 1800s, so not the case. Absolutely not. They want to overserve you. They want you to spend as much money as possible because that goes straight to their pocket. These saloons also are not like a modern bar today in the sense that they also act as a bank. These men would work in these manufacturing plants, get their pay stub, walk to the nearest saloon, hand that pay stub over, and those bartenders would give them their wages. Not only is it a bar and a bank, it is also a voting office. Indeed, you could vote in saloons at this point in time. Yeah, we'll scooch over just a smidge there. Bex, you good? No, you're fine. So it's also a voting office there. Indeed, men would vote when the time came to do it. Now, specifically men would, because at this point in time, saloons are not very welcoming to women or children, unless you're a woman of a very specific profession, we'll say. But a regular day-to-day woman not welcome inside these saloons whatsoever there. Now, these saloons, too, are very predatory. So much so they'll give free lunches. That sounds lovely, right?
Oh.
Until you realize those lunches are going to be very high in salt content. Because what does salt do?
Make you thirsty.
Makes you thirsty. What do you do when you're thirsty? You drink. Exactly. So we can see, especially as you look at this propaganda here, a lot of this is anti-saloon, not necessarily anti-drinking. Reason being, these men would spend so much money at this saloon, maybe even open up a tab after losing enough money. They die before paying off that debt, and that debt falls to their wives. Exactly. The women. We are one of the first people that want prohibition because we're the ones facing the consequences. Because we get this debt in a period where women cannot vote, cannot own property. It is very difficult for us to make our own money. So that small amount of debt is immediately crippling. And you gotta think, these wives definitely have children. These wives have people they love, and some of the best and worst things we do is out of love. So these women just want to protect themselves. They want to protect their kids. Not to mention the domestic violence that's going on at this point in time. In modern days, we all know people that can't handle their alcohol. Remember back in the day, they're drinking 7 gallons per person per year. It is a crazy time. So you can kind of understand that foundation of women wanting to stop that from happening and why you see here it's more anti-saloon than necessarily anti-drinking. Now, who's the second population? And how exactly are women able to start temperance when we don't have a lot of political power? To answer those questions, we're going to head to this hallway over here, you guys. And feel free to grab some selfies as we go along. We can mosey. A lot of people love getting pictures with Mo and Joe there, especially. And for those of you in here, feel free to kind of have a line up with each sugar over here. There's one with a hatchet in the next room, and she's still less scary than that one right there. Now, in this room, we're going to talk about the temperance movement and the organizations that started it. The two ones we're going to mainly talk about here are the Women's Christian Temperance Union, also known as the White Ribbon Army, or the Anti-Saloon League here. Why? Because they're just literally the two impactful, and we got 45 minutes to get through the store. So we'll start with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Again, the White Ribbon Army. We met two of their members downstairs. And that's exactly how they start temperance, is through protesting. Protesting the deliveries themselves, or even standing in front of these saloons and praying and singing hymns for the lost souls inside. I don't know if any of you have ever actually tried to drink a beer while someone's actively praying over you. It really makes the beer taste different. So much so that indeed this socially starts working. These men have to make eye contact with their mothers, their sisters, their wives, their daughters, women they genuinely love and respect. You gotta make eye contact, walk into a building they're actively. Exactly, I would crumble under that social pressure. Am I right? In some rare cases, they even convince saloon owners to shut down their businesses, in some extremely rare cases. But again, this is a social effect, not political. So the Women's Christian Temperance Union start doing tactics that I call no-nos, because they are not very morally right. One of the tactics they do is they start targeting education because they understand kids eventually will grow up to be voters, especially the young boys. So they go to schools and they give misinformation. They fearmonger with such outrageous statements like a single drop of alcohol can make your skin burn off. Crazy statements, but this fear-mongering does work, and we see these kids grow up and eventually they do vote in for prohibition. So we see those tactics do take place and they do take effect there. But let's be honest, they needed those young boys, they needed voters to make it happen politically, which brings me to the Anti-Saloon League, because you can't get prohibition without the assistance of men. Which man in particular? Well, Mr. Wayne Wheeler. Has anybody ever heard of Wayne Wheeler? Yeah, he's really not talked about a lot. I rarely get a yes to that question, which is shocking considering how impactful he was on our society. Because Wayne Wheeler is not just an Ohioan, he is not just a graduate of Oberlin College, he is the original lobbyist as we know it today. Wayne Wheeler would eventually graduate from Oberlin, join the Anti-Saloon League, and like I said, become the OG there. Now, the Anti-Saloon League was an organization that was funded by men you might recognize, Henry Ford, John D. Rockefeller, Mr. Carnegie, only the wealthiest men in the world at the time are funding the Anti-Saloon League.
Why did they not want that?
I know, that's my question for you guys. Why do you think?
Oh, because their workers were not unreliable.
Exactly, you want to sober up the workforce, 100%. Isn't it crazy? Because let's be honest, do you think Henry Ford didn't drink? Yeah, right? We think these men probably still drink. Very stressful, exactly. And as we know, stress leads to self-medication. So we know that Henry Ford would have been considered a wet dry, a man who would drink but would vote for the dry side there. But 100% the reason these industrial tycoons want this is they want to sober up the workforce. A drunkard does not make for a very good worker. You get a lot of accidents in these manufactories. People die, men not even coming in on Mondays because they're so hungover from the weekend. Sins in the eyes in these industrial tycoons. So they fund the Anti-Saloon League. Now, Wayne Wheeler would have so much control over Congress, he would literally sit in the halls of it, give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If you agreed with him, he would do whatever it took to get you voted back into office. If you disagreed with him, he would do whatever it took to get you out. Exactly. He would control 6 Congresses, 2 presidents, and in fact, he's the reason Prohibition happens, because when the vote comes, Woodrow Wilson, our president at the time, tries to veto it. Yes, he does. And it's overturned by Congress controlled by Wayne Wheeler. The best thing he would eventually do for this country is pass away. As he dies in 1927, we see Prohibition quickly overturned in 1933. So we see without his influence, it quickly goes away. Now, how does he get it to happen? Also, how does he get it to be socially popular? Because at this point in time, being a dry is to be sophisticated. It's to seen as being eruditic, very aristocratic. How does he make that happen? Well, he ties it in with other issues, especially immigration, because 1880 to 1920, we had one of the largest influxes of immigration the country has seen, mostly from Italy, Ireland, and Germany. Germany, super easy to build up a racist rhetoric against. We got World War I building up. There's already an anti-German rhetoric, and considering 80% of our brewers at this point have German last names, so easy to tie in together. You're not a patriot if you're drinking beer. We can even see propaganda over there, we'll pass in a second, that has a veteran saying, will you back me, or will you back the booze? Italians and Irish, a little bit more complicated. They have more in common than against. So what he does is he goes to the Italian community. He's like, my God, these Irish just drinking in these streets, leaving these whiskey bottles everywhere. Think about your wives, think about your kids. Then he goes to the Irish community. He's like, my God, these Italians drinking in these streets, wine bottles everywhere. Think about your wives, think about your kids. And he pits the communities against each other. He is the man that would coin the term pressure group. Like I said, not our favorite human in history here, not exactly the most moral of beings. So let's go ahead and meet a lady who we're all gonna enjoy, moral or not. She was definitely an icon. Let's go meet a 6-foot wonder of a woman who you could say carried a nation from temperance to prohibition. Follow me, and like I said, feel free to go slow and grab some pictures as we go along.
That thing's possessed.
Like I said, it's still less terrifying than that kid in there. But welcome everyone, and welcome and meet my friend Caroline Amelia Moore. At least that's how she's originally born in Texas. She makes her way to Kansas, where she spends the majority of her adult life, and eventually where she finds her second husband, Mr. David Nation. So indeed, her last name is Nation, and you can call her Carrie. So her name legally is Carrie A. Nation, and that's exactly what she would do. At the age of 50, she's praying one day. She's like, God, things are crazy down here. People are drinking in these streets. He's like, bestie, go off. So she picks up a rock. She walks to the nearest saloon, and you can see exactly what she does. She tears it down with her bare hands, stating, you wouldn't give me a vote, so I picked up a rock. Eventually, she replaces that rock with the hatchet she is known for, and she would deem these acts hatchetations. Because the little thing about Carrie, she's a marketing genius. Now, she would get arrested for each and every one of these hatchetations. She performs about 30 in her lifetime. Now, here's her loophole. Kansas is dry, goes dry in 1880. She starts this in the year 1900. So these saloons are operating illegally. So when the people arrest her, the most those police officers can do is charge her with vandalism. Still, that's a pretty penny. Those fines add up. So what's a girl to do? How does she afford all those prison fees? Well, let me introduce you to her merch cabinet, as Carrie A. Nation is the original influencer as we know them today. In fact, she would use the same tactics that Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton did in the 2000s. She would call the media on herself to report on these hatchetations, and she would garner a literal following. A little bit too notorious, she gains a little bit too notoriety, because in these towns when she visits, then people hear she's in town, she actually starts waiting at these saloons, waiting for her to show up. What do people do when they're waiting in saloons?
Drink!
Exactly, they drink, the antithesis of what she wants. So she has to problem solve. What's a girl to do? Well, if you look over here, you'll see the poster for her vaudeville act. She becomes the famous and original barroom smasher, where she has a fake bar on the stage. She smashes it down, all while proselytizing for temperance. She does this for a decade of her life, between 50 to 60. Eventually, she does collapse during that act. She is rushed to a doctor who would eventually prescribe her alcohol, medicinal whiskey. No knowledge on whether or not she drank it. She would pass away a couple months later, before Prohibition ever happened. And indeed, on her tombstone, it would state, she did what she could. She actually was a part of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She deemed them a little too tame. Something that this lady over here might have taken some offense to, because this lady is Lillian M.N. Stevens, and she's actually the 3rd president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. In fact, under her leadership, the organization would open 1,000 chapters in a single year. These ladies were hustlers, man. I might not agree with them about a lot of things, but I really respect their work ethic, because that was the superpower on the dry side, was their organization, versus the wet side over here. Faces you might not recognize, but names, we'll see. This is Frederick Pabst. I have Joseph Schlitz. We got Fred Miller, David Yingling, and Adolphus Busch himself, the owner of Anheuser-Busch. Exactly. As you can tell, again, very German men, very German last names. Now, the downside to the wets were they were not on the same side. Brewers were against distillers. Oh my gosh, I'll just let him
The
take it
wave
here.
of prohibition now sweeping over the United States is only a passing craze. If given full swing, its meanness and cruelty will ruin the civilized world. I believe they mean well, but they are on the wrong track.
On the wrong track? Good sir, this terrible disease that you and others distill has been ruining lives for many centuries. Alcohol has done nothing but but bring an untimely death to thousands of our fellow citizens. The number is too high to bear, exceeding all those destroyed by war, pestilence, fire, flood, and famine combined.
Moderation is the answer, not prohibition. This anti-Zulu movement will run itself out over due course of time because the people will see that it rests on un-American ideals and interferes with personal liberties. The American people will never stand for it. Moderation, Mrs. Stevens? That is the only American way forward.
Mr. Bush, the only way to overcome trafficking in intoxicating liquor is through state and national prohibitions. We of the White Ribbon Army know that nothing has caused such misery in our nation as the manufacture and sales of alcohol liquor. Meanwhile, you and others profit from the ignorance of an uneducated public who know little of the effects this poison has upon their lives.
Madam, brewers make light, wholesome drinks. Our industry is a perfectly legitimate one. It is one of the greatest payers of taxes to the government and one of the largest employers of labor in America. Why should it not be maintained and sustained?
The liquor business is as fraudulent and damaging as the lottery. We believe that an amendment to our national constitution will be passed. And
the American people will reject this infringement.
And that the flag of the United States will finally wave over a nation redeemed from the home-wrecking, heart-breaking curse of liquor. God is on our side, and we are going to win.
We shall see who prevails, madam.
Oh my gosh, you guys, I wonder who wins. Ironically, neither of them would actually see Prohibition happen. Both of them would pass away before it does. Lillian would die of a heart attack, very reflective of the stress she'd endured in life. And Adolphus Bush over here would die of cirrhosis of the liver. Very reflective of how he lived life, yeah. Now, we have covered who exactly wanted Prohibition. We've learned it is women and industrial tycoons. Now it's time to learn how they get it to happen, both politically and socially. With that, we're gonna head over here, you guys. So hard enjoying it so far. Feel free to stand next to the Ford right here. This is a real Ford, by the way. Our vehicles are original. We got them kind of like a Lego set. We had to build them in the rooms. But I hear a celebration. I think one of the side won. I hope no one's losing a bet here. It is the Dries who eventually win.
I rushed from the gallery, church bells ringing. We were in ecstasy. The Lord has received our prayers. Victory is ours, and our country will suffer no more. Tell them the world is made for women too.
And to be honest, in the 1920s, the world must have felt it was made for women, because not only do they get Prohibition, they also get the right to vote. Why are we getting all these amendments passed all at the same year? There's a census coming, so we want to get them passed as fast as possible there. So how does Prohibition start? Well, as we learned, it starts with temperance, with those social movements. But politically, it happens county by county. Counties slowly adopt their own Prohibition-era laws. Eventually, an entire state will go dry. The very first state that goes dry would be Maine in 1851. As we noted earlier, Georgia was the 8th state to go dry. We actually go dry in 1908. A fact Savannah still has not forgiven. We kind of always been the redheaded stepchild of Georgia. When Georgia goes dry, Savannah tries to succeed. We try to become the separate state of Chatham. Considering we're in Savannah, Georgia, and Chatham County, we could tell that was not a very successful succession. But nonetheless, eventually enough states adopt a Prohibition-era law, the entire country can go dry. So what they go dry with is something called the Volstead Act, The Volstead Act was voted on in October of 1919, and this act would create the 18th Amendment that would make illegal the creating, transporting, and selling of alcohol liquor. Does anybody feel like there's a verb missing there?
Consumption.
Consumption, drinking it. Ironically enough, it is never made illegal to drink alcohol during Prohibition, a fact that is usually astounding to people. It's a big misconception. The reason why drinking is never made illegal is entirely because of the same reason America was founded, religious freedom. You see, Christianity and Judaism, mostly Catholicism and Judaism.
The wines.
Exactly. They use wine as a sacrament, as a religious rite. So if you make drinking alcohol illegal, you make those rites illegal, and that would have been the most anti-American thing you could do. But this does leave a lovely little loophole for our citizens because this leads to January 16th, the day before Prohibition starts, also known as the last call for alcohol. If that's a term that sounds familiar, you see where it comes from, because this was the last day everyone could buy as much alcohol as possible, bring it to the house, where when the next day Prohibition starts, they could legally still drink it, because they weren't transporting it, they weren't selling it, they weren't making it, they were just enjoying it there. So we can see that lovely little loophole there would lead to a lot of hoarding during the 1900s there for you. Now, some people are emotionally devastated over this. Some people are ironically throwing a funeral for Mr. John Barleycorn. Who is that? Well, John for John Doe, barley for beer, corn for liquor. He is the human spirit of drinking itself. Some people are delighted, some people are devastated, but what are the actual effects on the American people? To learn that, you guys, we're going to head to the next hallway.
So the religious wine, was that made in the U.S. under exemption or no?
Yes,
was brought
it was.
in, okay.
Yeah, and so was medicinal whiskey, still made in the U.S. Forrester would be the first distiller that would get the certification needed.
So they had an exemption to make the wine.
Yes, there were exemptions, 100%. That's a great question. Feel free to sit down if anybody would like to. We're officially halfway through, y'all. Now, here we're going to get into what are the lasting after effects. The most immediate one, of course, would affect the alcohol industry, as brewers can't brew, distillers can't still, coopers, the ones making the barrels, can no longer have liquid to fill them, and glass makers are also affected. Not only that, but restaurants are affected during this period. In fact, this is where we get one thing we have 100 years later. Our modern tipping culture is because of Prohibition. Before Prohibition, a restaurant owner, very déclassé to a waitress accept a tip. It's an insult to that owner. It's like you're saying that owner can't afford their workers. During Prohibition, that owner can't afford their workers. So they start encouraging their staff to accept tips. That's why America has such a different culture with that there. Again, 100 years later, we still have that same culture. Another thing we have 100 years later has to do with brewing and distilling being a huge source of taxation for America. About 40% of our taxes before Prohibition come from brewers and distillers. It is a huge source of employment, so this really is a big economic risk. Who does the government turn to make up for those taxes?
The people.
The people. We get the income tax because of Prohibition. Again, 100 years later, we still have that income tax. So we can see, again, the butterfly effect taking place here. These people didn't think that 100 years later, we would still be facing the repercussions from this choice. Now, we still recognize the names of Bush, Yingling, but all these names, Miller, how the heck do we still recognize when we just covered that these men died before Prohibition? Well, they got creative. You see, these people still had manufacturing plants. They still had people willing to work for them. They still had people willing to transport. They just needed a different product, which is where I turn to this cabinet right here. My favorite personally would be Yingling. They would make ice cream during Prohibition. You can actually see the ice cream truck right there, little cup right there. The funniest would be Pabst. Pabst makes cheese during Prohibition. And does anybody want to take a guess at who they sell that cheese to afterwards? My hint is it's a mac and cheese beloved.
Kraft.
Kraft, yes. They sell it to Kraft. It's where they get the recipe for Velveeta. So we can see long-lasting after effects there. Now, some people are able to kind of make their way through Prohibition. Some people are emotionally devastated by it again, which brings me to Girard, Alabama. Now, we still recognize those men because they had the opportunity and, more importantly, the means to switch over. That's not the case for Girard. This was a small town that surrounded a distillery, meaning when Prohibition starts, that distillery goes under, and so does Girard. It no longer exists. You cannot find it on a map today. As we move along too, we're going to see another colorized photo of another population that was severely affected by Prohibition, a population that was actually used to make it happen, and that would be the soldiers in World War I. Feel free to kind of come all the way over here, you guys. We can come all the way to the barrels. Those barrels always throw me off. That 16 makes me think of 2016, not 1916. But behind me, we'll see a colorized photo of an actual event that takes place on the 4th of July. These are veterans from World War I protesting Prohibition because they were overseas when the vote happens. World War II ends in 1918. We still have soldiers coming home when the Volstead Act is voted on. And these men are not too happy. Remember, these baby boys just went through trench warfare, some of the most horrific at this point in time. So they're very traumatized baby boys. They come home, they just want to self-medicate. In their eyes, they went over fighting for our rights, and they came back home to find that theirs were taken away. Behind you right there, you guys will see one of the coolest artifacts in the museum. That is a bottle of Mount Vernon Pure Rye Whiskey. Does anybody remember who owns Mount Vernon?
George Washington.
George Washington, again, from day one, intrinsically tied. Just to kind of conceptualize how this country's government was founded, I want to think about you with your friends in your 30s, drinking the night away, creating an entirety system of government. That is how our government was founded. Our Declaration of Independence was signed off in a tavern.
Is that still filled or it's empty?
Still filled. There's still
Really?
whiskey in
Wow.
there. Indeed. Now, you guys, we're talking a lot about Americans, so let's talk about a populace that wasn't doing too well before Prohibition, but definitely made a lot of bank during Prohibition. Let's meet us a moonshiner. Feel free to grab onto this railing for safety here as we enter our deep, dark woods.
Oh, they had to do it in secret.
They did. That's where you get the name for moonshine, because you had to do it in the moonlight because it was always done illegally. Moonshine actually exists before Prohibition, but during Prohibition it skyrockets.
Hey, what are y'all doing back here?
Oh, we're talking about you. That's so weird. Oh my gosh.
Well, let me tell you what I'm doing back here.
Go off.
Making moonshine. That's right. Carrying on a family tradition. It all started a long, long time ago. My great-grandfather was back here, this very spot, with copper steel just like this. Well, times is hard back here. They had to do it. They had to make moonshine to make ends meet. This is the way of life. This is just a family heritage and a tradition. Then, Prohibition started. Prohibition says you can't make alcohol, no way, legal or illegal. All the city saloons closed, all the business, you cannot buy, drink, sell alcohol, nowhere. Well, guess what? That was great for the moonshiners. Our business is booming here. It took off like crazy. I've been working this steel day and night. You see that barrel of mash right there? It's about ready to run. I'm gonna put it in that steel right there, get that fire just right. This thump will go to thump. The creek water comes in right there and hits that copper coil. It'll come out of that 120 proof. Well, that's looking good right there, but I tell you what, if you get caught with that 120 proof, you pay a fine. You get caught making that moonshine with that steel right there, you go to jail. I better cut this light.
I think he sees a cop. We gotta run, you guys. And by run, I mean very carefully walk into this guy's hallway, please.
Walgreens.
Yes, Walgreens. We're going to talk about that in a second. Well, feel free to stand next to these cabinets here, you guys, as we're going to kind of sit in here for a sec and talk about how people were able to still access alcohol during this time. Feel free to come all the way over here, too. Now, we already discovered moonshine. The thing with moonshine is you really got to trust the source of that product, because him, you trust to make it. He's not going to blind you. He's not going to kill you. Me, on the other hand, I am likely to do both. So you very much have to trust the source. It does skyrocket to a very hot commodity during Prohibition, but it's not the only way to access alcohol. In fact, there are two legal ways. We've talked a little bit about it already with religion and medicine. A lot of people are finding God during Prohibition. During Prohibition, you'll find the insurgence of a lot of very untraditional rabbi names, like Rabbi McDonough or Rabbi O'Leary. Because if you were Catholic or Jewish, you were given wine, about 12 gallons worth per person, so you could, again, do all those religious rites still. They were given certifications at certain vineyards to be able to still make that. In fact, one of the coolest artifacts inside the museum is right in this cabinet. It's that Vino Santo grape brick. This would be a legal way to access wine because that brick has grapes, yeast, and sugar. You could legally buy it as it was advertised to make vinegar. But on the back of it would have a warning label stating, warning, do not mix this with water. Warning, do not put it in an airtight container. Warning, don't put that container away for 3 weeks from the sunlight. Don't let it ferment. If it does, just add some baking soda. That'll take care of it. But through that warning label, they're able to legally sell it because it covers their butts. But through that warning label, they tell you exactly how to make wine. You can actually do the same thing with a bottle of Welch's today and get grounded by your parents if you feel like it. Now, the second way people are able to access alcohol is through medicine. Medicinal whiskey is still seen viable at this point in time. And what kind of ailments does medicinal whiskey help with? Well, if you have a headache, you could get medicinal whiskey. Feeling some insomnia, get some medicinal whiskey. If you're feeling some old age, you could get medicinal whiskey, where the doctor's orders would be take 3 ounces every hour for stimulant until stimulated. Yeah, very, very authentic medical advice right there.
Sounds like what they're doing for weed now.
That's the most comment I get about this museum is probably 100 years later we're going to have the same thing for marijuana.
Yep.
There's been a lot of tie-ins for sure. Now, 40% of people are just making alcohol in their own home. This is where you get terms like bathtub gin. Not because it's actually made in a bathtub, but that was the biggest space you could put the bucket for to where the faucet could fill it with water. But some people might make stuff on the stove, like this lady over here clearly making water on that stovetop. Now she clearly has a little bundle of joy, and she takes this bundle of joy to her neighbors every single morning, and every single morning her neighbors are still happy to see her. And if you look inside, you'll see why, because there is a hidden compartment for alcohol, because that baby is a bootlegger. Now, not everybody has a bootlegging baby. Cop, of course, ain't gonna wake up a baby to find some alcohol there. Great distraction, but not everyone has access to a child. So in this cabinet, you guys will see different ways people are able to gain access to transporting their alcohol. If you're more scholarly or academic, maybe you like poetry, you would get this book here, the Book of the 4 Swallows, which has exactly 4 little vials inside. Ladies might like a little lipstick container. Gentlemen might use a cane with a tubing system, the top of which would even be an ounce pour. But all of us tour guides, we have the same favorite. It's these eggs right here. Why are those eggs so special? Well, they're just eggs. What makes them special is what humans would do with them. They would poke a hole in the bottom, pour out the egg contents, maybe make a scramble while they're at it, but they would replace it with alcohol, seal it with wax, paint it over, and you have the perfect little shot vials, incredibly discreet. The only red flag for these eggs would be the price of them. And this is where you see a lot of changing in advertisement during the 1920s. This is actually where you get the cage-free, farm-fresh. That is not at all true, you guys. I'm pulling your leg a little bit there. We actually do get some changes in advertisement during this period, though. It's a very fascinating part of our time. You'll find the 1920s laid the foundations for modern society today. But as we walk into this room, you guys, we're going to start talking about what brings Prohibition to an end. How exactly does this stop? Now, if you guys want to stand next to this Peerless over here, feel free. It is the most luxurious vehicle you could get at this point in time. We'll get into what's inside in a second. The first thing to bring Prohibition down would be lack of enforcement. It is not a popular law. There's also a miscommunication going on between the federals and the states. The states think the federal government's going to enforce it. They made it a national thing. The federal government thinks the states are going to enforce it. They wanted it in the first place. So there's a huge misunderstanding there. This would actually lead to there never being more than 3,000 federal enforcement officers for Prohibition the entire almost 14 years it's in effect. That means for every group of 70,000 people, there is one poor person's job to make sure those 70,000 do not create, transport, or sell alcohol. Literally an impossible task. This lack of enforcement would lead to the second reason, of course, increasement of organized crime. In fact, Savannah would eventually be known as the bootleg spigot of the South. But that lack of enforcement we're still going to talk about because it leads to an incredibly dark chapter of Prohibition, in my opinion, one of the darkest. It leads to the deputization of the Ku Klux Klan. Yes, before Prohibition, KKK is a club you can join, but it's not the most popular. during Prohibition, it skyrockets in popularity. Because remember, the Anti-Saloon League used incredibly racist rhetoric to get it to pass, rhetoric the KKK ran with, meaning if you weren't white and you weren't Protestant, they did not care about you one bit, and they would not be using that power responsibly. Repercussions we are still facing to this day. In fact, desperate people make very desperate choices. Another dark chapter of Prohibition would lead to the American people getting poisoned by our own government. 12,000 almost Americans are poisoned at this point in time because instead of destroying the whiskey, the barrel busters poison to see where it ends up, who ends up getting sick from it. You can trace it a lot easier that way. Wow. It's also a lot less effort. Now, this would, of course, lead to incredibly violent times, and as we come around here, we're going to talk about the second reason why Prohibition comes to an end, and that would be because of organized crime. The demand for alcohol never ceases. It is only who is supplying it that changes. And who is supplying it? Well, these gentlemen are Mr. Bugs Moran, Al Capone, and Machine Gun Jack. If any of you would like to pick up those Chicago typewriters, get a little photo opportunity, feel free. I will say they're very heavy, so just be careful, but you are more than welcome to pick these up right here, as they are not real, but they're just weighted to be the same way as one. I will still talk as we do this, though. So, Al Capone, Bugs Moran, of course, as we know them, the original gangsters. As we see, gangsters and the organized crime ring that we understand as today is laid during this period. Because again, that supply and demand never go away. Al Capone and Bugs Moran would gain so much wealth during this period. To conceptualize it, let me kind of refigure here. Bugs Moran would be Elon Musk. Al Capone would be Jeff Bezos. That is how much wealth these gentlemen get during this period. In fact, in this cabinet here, you can see the increasing of print that happens at this period. There's a real $1,000 bill in that cabinet right there because they needed more paper money. Why? Because bootlegging is incredibly profitable. Now, Al Capone especially would have a lot of superpowers. What was his superpower? Well, it was charisma. He was affable. You really wanted to like Al Capone when you met him because he was incredibly charming. In fact, he charmed the entire country. The media would report him in almost a Robin Hood-like figure. In fact, they're the ones that give him the term Scarface, a term he hated because he was an incredibly narcissistic, violent man, as he was the one that would start the St. Valentine's Day massacre that killed over 7 of Bugs Moran's men, and he never took credit for it. One of my favorite quotes of the museum is up here. When I sell liquor, it's called bootlegging. When my patrons serve it at Lakeshore Drive, it's called hospitality. That man with those baby blues looked me in my eyes and said that sentence to my face. I'd say, Bestie, you're so right. People are really unfair towards you. But if you look inside the Peerless, you guys will see what the cost of all that hospitality was. It was violence. Now, this is a Peerless, top of the line luxury. You see this car, you think that man has wealth. How do you get wealth in the 1920s? Usually through illegal means. So if you see this car in the streets of Chicago or New York and you don't recognize inside, you are not asking questions, you are shooting. This man could have been a bootlegger. He also just could have been a rich tycoon trying to take a girl out on a date. This would be such a violent period. Wealthy men would actually tell their chauffeurs to take less. Do you know how much violence has to be going on for a wealthy man to ask for the less luxurious option just to not get caught up in it? That is how much violence is going on in the 1920s. But truthfully, the third and final thing that would bring Prohibition to an end, and the main reason it comes to an end, is a certain stock market crash in 1929. Exactly, the Great Depression, meaning that income tax that was supposed to replace brewers and distillers no longer has income to tax. So, in 1933, on December 5th, Roosevelt would sign in the 21st Amendment, bringing an end to Prohibition. As we learned there, it took a couple states to build up to Prohibition. It also takes a couple states to get rid of Prohibition. In this Georgia, we're number 13 to get rid of it. Does anybody want to guess when Mississippi, the last state to get rid of Prohibition, what year they did it in?
The 60s?
It was the 60s. In fact, it was 1966. Insane. That is a lot closer than people expect. But truth be told, the 1920s laid out the foundation for the 1960s in those speakeasies. If anybody wants to do the Charleston, go ahead and try right there. The little hints, you gotta click your heels. But in these speakeasies, the reason we have the foundation of the peace and love as we know it today is because everyone was welcome in these speakeasies. Women were welcome, people of color, people who are LGBTQ could be in speakeasies. Not only that, they could be out in them. Unheard of before, that's something that could have gotten them killed. Why are these speakeasies these places for integration? Well, they're illegal. You're not going to call the cops on them, even if you don't like the people inside. You don't know who owns that speakeasy. Al Capone's a dangerous man to make an enemy of. So this does lead to people integrating in ways they didn't before. It leads to dance crazes like the Charleston, music like jazz and Duke Ellington, and it leads to an entire new chapter of America. Let's go see that chapter before our eyes, you guys, as we're going to head into our speakeasy here. It's a nice tight hall. We're going to get real close. Thankfully, we've got a pretty small group, so feel free to get close. This guy's got to get eyes on everybody for everyone to get in. So come forward, feel free to come forward.
That's right.
I need it to be known, Gus sent us. Hi.
What do you want?
You want to see the speakeasy, right?
Who sent you?
Gus, tell him Gus sent
Gus!
God sent us.
Yeah. All right.
Honestly, you guys, there was a tour that didn't get in the other day. There was a very suspicious man on that tour. He was a CPA. Awesome, you guys. Welcome on in. Go ahead and have a seat over here for me. And I will be grabbing your drinks for you guys. Absolutely. Once we grab our drinks, I'm a little cheesy. We're going to do a little cheers to the end of Prohibition together.
Here's what's funny. Where that thing was a little bit ago to dance to Charleston, that's a one-way glass. One-way glass, so you can do that. So we are now in their speakeasy, which is open in the evening after the museums. Well, okay, that's just the chair. So after the museum closes, this opens just for like the general public here. See that? So we're getting our drinks.
And then here is my daiquiri.
Thank you. And this is the one that's open after the museum as well, correct? Okay. This is a different entrance.
Yes, it is a slightly different entrance. But you guys, I know not everyone can enjoy the drink themselves, but when I get to one, we are all going to be a little cheesy. We're going to cheers to the end of Prohibition in 3, 2, 1. Cheers!
Cheers!
Yeah! Happy days are here again, y'all. Now, my last thing about Prohibition, I love to end on a positive note. One of the best parts about Prohibition is our greater understanding of alcoholism. We talked about F. Scott Fitzgerald earlier, the man, of course, renowned alcoholic, shockingly on the dry side. He would move to France during Prohibition. So we can see there's a little bit more than just access to alcohol that leads to alcoholism. In fact, the big book, the book that AA is based on to this day, was published in the year 1934, the year after Prohibition. With that, you guys, this comes to a conclusion of our tour. This is a continuation of the museum, so feel free to take some laps around. There's a NASCAR room over there, as we have NASCAR because of Prohibition too. Those bootleggers like going fast. There's a movie that plays over there. Most importantly, there's the restrooms over there. My name was Emmy. If you guys enjoyed this tour, if y'all hated this tour, hi, I'm Justin. It's so nice to meet you. But I'm going to hang out for just a couple seconds, you guys. So if you have any questions about Savannah, any thoughts about Prohibition itself, any after anything at all, just let me know. I'm going to be hanging out for a couple minutes before heading to the next door.
The guided tour took us up to the speakeasies, and there's a little bit more here in the back on NASCAR and cars going fast, and how NASCAR was kind of created by the Henry Ford's unveiling the first V8. Yeah, so this is NASCAR being created by Prohibition, and NASCAR, the original moonshine runners, were the origin of NASCAR. That's kind of cool. I did not know that the original moonshine runners were the origins of NASCAR. They made the cars go fast. They had to go faster than the cops, and that's what it was. Kind of cool. That's all it was. It was outrunning the cops. Had to go fast enough to outrun the cops. This is actually really cute. So you can come into this bar in the evening. She said during the day they just have drinks of the period, but during the evening they've got tequilas and other stuff like that, which are unique. Let's just see. Yeah, so you can see they've got a lot of seating, stuff like that. Everything. Please leave your glasses here. And much like everything else in Savannah, thanks for visiting Historic Tours, National Storyteller. They do have plastic cups out here if you want to take your drinks to go. Museum gift shop is down the stairs. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and just take another picture right on the inside before I go. But I have to say, let's go ahead and exit through the gift shop, because unfortunately we must head south. So we don't have all this time. Chris, these are all the things in the area. What I think is funny is there's a thing called Moon River Brewing Company I tried to go to last night, and they're permanently closed. So they might have to paint over that. The Frogtown Hop in Savannah. Let us all exit through the gift shop. Love that. Leave the glass. Take it to go. So this seems to be their this is their entrance that they use for the speakeasy in the evening, that you can enter the speakeasy separately during the evening. You'll see it says booze. Let's take a quick look at the gift shop, because why not? You call me old-fashioned. All right. You get a gangster hat if you want it, or a prohibition. Sip happens. It's okay to whine. Oh. 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 Those are nice. You whine, I whine. Probably get them cheaper on Amazon. If they had ones that were unique to this museum, I'd definitely get them. Geez, Prohibition, Savannah. Very cool. If they only had a wine, well, I have. And let's see what else I got here. Wow, that got me all turned around going in there. So this is a cotton used to support secession. Got bourbon. Savannah. 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 Grandpa's Reserve. That's funny. 100 proof. That was a great little museum. I would definitely recommend you get the guided tour with the drink at the end. Cute little tour. Pretty reasonably priced. This is Richard from No Pants Profits and that Prohibition Museum. It was a heck of an interesting time. And when you wear no pants and you have no alcohol, only thing you have left to lose is, I mean, if you watch this, only thing you got left to lose is a religious organization or medicinal. But yeah, it's very much the weed of back in the day. And that's it. Have a great one. Bye.